If you thought you knew history, think again. Get ready to dive headfirst into the wildest, most jaw-dropping moments in history. These 100 historical facts will prove that the past is anything but boring. Buckle up. Believe it or not, Ramses the Great is the only pharaoh in history to be issued a modern passport 3,000 years after he died. Why? Because his mummified body needed to travel to Paris for preservation. And under international law, even the dead need an ID to cross borders. So Egypt gave him one. Occupation? King deceased. The reason was serious. His body was deteriorating from a fungal infection, and France had the expertise to stop the damage. When he arrived in Paris, they didn't just wheel him into a lab. He was welcomed with full military honors. That's right, a literal mummy got a head of state reception. Once stabilized, French scientists confirmed Ramses had arthritis, bad teeth, and old battle injuries. After treatment, the pharaoh flew home to Cairo, passport stamped, where he now rests in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. Napoleon Bonaparte fought 62 major battles and won 52. So statistically, he's the greatest general in history. Nobody comes even close. He controlled most of Europe, richer than any modern billionaire. If you own that much land today, you'd be a trillionaire. And yet, what's he remembered for? Waterloo. One loss, that's it. One mistake, the lesson, even the Titans fall. You can conquer continents, rewrite history, and still be reduced to your worst day. Think about that. Back in 1919, two German brothers, Adolf Dassler and Rudolf Dassler, started a shoe company called Gebruder Dassler. Business boomed. But things took a darker turn in the 1930s, when both brothers joined the Nazi Party. Then came the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Somehow they convinced Jesse Owens, yes, the Black American track star who humiliated Hitler's Aryan supremacy myth, to wear their shoes. Owens crushed it, 4 gold medals in Nazi-made sneakers. But the real twist came after World War II. The brothers turned on each other. The same old story, bad blood, accusations, and betrayal. In 1948, the company split. Rudolf launched Ruda, which soon became Puma. Adolf rebranded using his nickname, Addy, and his last name, Dassler, and created Adidas. Two of the biggest sports brands on earth were born out of a family feud fueled by politics, war, and Olympic glory. Over 2,000 years ago, the Romans built roads so well engineered that many are still in use today. Some even form the foundations of modern highways across Europe. These roads weren't just stone paths. They had drainage systems, layered foundations, and were slightly curved to let rainwater run off. The Via Appia, built in 312 BCE, still carries traffic today. So next time you're stuck in traffic, thank the Romans for inventing both the road and the traffic jam. This is Derinkuyu, the largest underground city ever discovered. Buried 280 feet deep, about the height of a 25-story building, this ancient metropolis could house 20,000 people. And how was it found? By accident. In 1963, a Turkish farmer knocked down a basement wall while searching for his missing chickens and uncovered an ancient city. But Derinkuyu wasn't new. It dates back thousands of years. The first written mention? Around 370 BC. But many believe the Hittites, around 1600 BC, started digging the first levels as a secret defensive refuge. Later, the Phrygians took over, and they went full Iron Age engineering on it. They carved out a labyrinth of tunnels, hidden doors, and chambers. Even had a strategy. Livestock stayed on the upper floors to contain the smell and keep the heat rising to warm the lower levels. Smart doesn't begin to cover it. Deeper down, homes, schools, ritual chambers, wine cellars, and the real genius, the ventilation shafts. These weren't just airways. They were part of a 180-foot deep well system, circulating cool air, delivering fresh water, and keeping the whole city breathable. This wasn't just survival. It was ancient underground urban planning, thousands of years ahead of its time. Despite what the rumors say, Thomas Crapper didn't invent the flushing toilet. In 1861, he was hired by King Edward VII to construct lavatories in several royal palaces. He patented a number of toilet-related inventions, but did not actually invent the modern toilet. Although he was the first to display his wares in a showroom, his real contribution was making the flushing toilet popular and improving parts like the ball cock, which controls water flow in the tank. The funny part is, the word crap has nothing to do with him. It actually comes from Middle English and was first recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary back in 1846. Long before Crapper made his mark. So he's more about plumbing innovation than potty jokes. Sherlock Holmes had a side hustle as a goalie. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wasn't just the mastermind behind Sherlock Holmes. He was also a trained medical doctor, a best-selling author, and a passionate advocate for spiritualism, which means he seriously believed in communicating with spirits. But here's the twist. The guy was obsessed with sports: cricket, boxing, baseball, cycling, golf, motorbiking, billiards, skiing, you name it. He once described sports as moral training grounds for virtues like fair play and perseverance. The man wasn't just writing about heroic character. He was out there living it. So next time you read Holmes boxing in the Sign of Four or sprinting down foggy London streets, know this: Conan Doyle wasn't making it up. He was that guy. Hitler's famous tiny mustache wasn't just a style choice. It was practical. Back in World War I, he sported a much bushier one, but trimmed it down to fit perfectly under a gas mask. Imagine having to reshape your entire facial signature just to survive poison gas attacks. The toothbrush mustache wasn't a fashion trend. It was a battlefield necessity. When World War I broke out in 1914, Flora Murray and Louisa Garrett Anderson, both qualified doctors and life partners, tried to join the Armed Forces Medical Services but were flat out rejected because they were women. Instead of backing down, they built their own hospital staffed entirely by women: surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses, the full medical team. Their all-female hospital quickly earned a reputation as the best treatment center for wounded soldiers in the entire UK, proving that sexism didn't stand a chance against their skill and determination. On 13th of December 1931, Winston Churchill was struck by a car while crossing Fifth Avenue in New York City. He had looked the wrong way before crossing the street and was dragged for several yards, sustaining bruises, sprains, and cuts. In the same year, a 19-year-old British aristocrat named John Scott Ellis was driving a red Fiat in Munich and almost hit the future Führer, Adolf Hitler. Scott Ellis jumped out of his car and apologized, and Hitler only suffered minor bruises. They shook hands, and Scott Ellis later remarked, "For a few seconds, perhaps, I held the history of Europe in my rather clumsy hands." D.H. Lawrence wasn't just a famous writer. During World War I, he got kicked out of his own village because people suspected him of signaling German U-boats with his laundry line. Imagine that, your socks and shirts doubling as enemy communication tools. No proof, just paranoia in wartime. It's a wild reminder of how fear can turn neighbors into accusers overnight. The Wars of the Roses was a series of rivalries and disputes that took place between 1455 and 1487 among the English nobility, largely between Lancaster and York, with many switching sides. However, it was not called the Wars of the Roses at the time. Although roses feature in imagery from Tudor times onwards, the moniker first appeared in Sir Walter Scott's novel Anne of Geierstein in 1829. The name the Cousins' War was first applied to the conflict in the 20th century. After Admiral Nelson died at the Battle of Trafalgar, instead of a quick sea burial like usual, they actually preserved his body in a giant cask of brandy. Yes, brandy. His corpse was stored in the hold of HMS Victory and shipped all the way back to London for a proper burial. Think of it as the ultimate on-the-rocks preservation method, keeping history intact with a splash of spirits. This wasn't just for show. Alcohol was used to prevent decay before modern embalming, making brandy the unlikely guardian of one of Britain's greatest naval heroes. One of the few known medieval battlefield orders is the cry of havoc. Havoc released the army from any formation and gave freedom to loot, and was an order only ever to be given when it was utterly certain that a battle was won and discipline was no longer required. It was considered so dangerous that it was expressly forbidden without permission from the army's commander. A wrongly timed cry of havoc could cost a battle, and there were severe punishments for crying havoc without permission. On January 1st, 1886, the British government didn't just send Queen Victoria a cake. They handed her an entire country. They officially gifted her Burma, adding a massive new jewel to the British Empire's crown. This wasn't some small token. It marked a major expansion of British control in Southeast Asia, boosting their power and influence, while also intensifying local resistance. So yeah, that birthday present came with some serious geopolitical weight. Fewer than 10 people were there to witness the Wright brothers' first powered flight on December 17, 1903. Imagine that, one of the most groundbreaking moments in human history, watched by basically a handful of folks. No massive crowds, no viral videos, just a small group watching a machine take its first tentative steps into the sky. It's wild how something so revolutionary started almost in secret. The oldest McDonald's still serving up burgers and fries opened in Downey, California, way back in 1953. Unlike most McDonald's outlets, this one wasn't franchised by Ray Kroc, the man who turned McDonald's into a global empire. Instead, it was run by the original McDonald brothers, which meant it kept its retro charm and didn't modernize with the rest of the chain for decades. It wasn't until 1990 that the corporation finally bought it out, ending its run as the last independent McDonald's standing. This place is basically a living museum of fast food history. When William the Conqueror was crowned at Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066, what should have been a celebration spiraled into chaos. His guard heard cheers from the crowd, but thought it was a hostile roar. Mistaking applause for rebellion, they launched a brutal massacre against innocent bystanders. So much for a peaceful coronation. William's big day started with bloodshed and confusion. Pavlov's house wasn't just any building. It was a fortress in the middle of Stalingrad that held out for 2 brutal months. The Germans threw wave after wave of attacks at it, and here's the kicker. They lost more soldiers trying to take this single building than they did during their entire assault on Paris. That's a testament to how fiercely it was defended and how pivotal it was in the battle's outcome. Of Winston Churchill's most famous 1940 speeches, blood, toil, tears and sweat, fight them on the beaches, finest hour, and the few, only one finest hour, was actually broadcast on the radio at the time. All of them were delivered to the House of Commons, but only after his finest hour speech did Churchill record a version later for the BBC. The other speeches he only recorded in 1949. So those legendary speeches we often hear weren't originally heard by millions in real time, as you might think. Cleopatra, the famed Queen of Egypt, is remembered for various things, including being unrolled from carpets, though it was more of a duvet, bathing in milk, unconfirmed, and using a snake to kill herself. It was probably just poison and no asp was involved. But one thing you may not know about her is that she married not one but two of her brothers, who were both called Ptolemy. In fact, everyone back then seemed to be called Ptolemy, including her dad. But that's another story. In ancient Egyptian times, women were not allowed to rule without a male consort. So CLEO picked her kid brother on two separate occasions. One drowned due to golden armor, and the other was probably poisoned on her instructions. Talk about brotherly love. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876, he didn't expect us to say hello when answering it. Nope. He thought the proper way to greet someone on a call was ahoy, like a sea captain hailing a passing ship. Bell was dead serious about it too, and used ahoy for the rest of his life. It was Thomas Edison who pushed for hello, even suggesting it in a telephone manual, and eventually Edison won the greeting war. But for a while there, we were this close to sounding like pirates every time the phone rang. Fidel Castro didn't just dodge bullets, he survived over 600 assassination plots. That's right, more than 600 separate attempts to end the life of Cuba's revolutionary leader. The plots came from every direction: exiled enemies, rival factions, mobsters. Some plans were cartoonishly bizarre, like offering him a cigar packed with explosives, or gifting him a diving suit laced with toxic fungi. There were schemes involving poison pens, tainted milkshakes, and even a plan to make his beard fall out to humiliate him on TV. None worked. Castro mocked the attempts, saying if avoiding death were an Olympic sport, he'd have a gold medal. Iconic nurse Florence Nightingale made her name tending to soldiers during the Crimean War, but she practiced her nursing abilities as a youngster by tending to a plethora of injured animals. One of the more unusual ones was a little owl called Athena she trained to peck her sister when she was annoying. Florence Nightingale tended to wounded animals such as owls. And it wasn't just woodland birds that took her fancy. She adopted at least 60 cats during her lifetime and advocated using small animals, even tortoises, to help sick people in the hospital recover more quickly. On 27th of May, 1798, the Prime Minister of Britain literally took politics to the battlefield. William Pitt the Younger challenged George Tierney, an MP and high-ranking official, to a duel. Yes, a sitting prime minister stood 10 paces apart from a political rival with pistols drawn over a heated debate in Parliament. It happened on Putney Common, a patch of grass that nearly became a crime scene. They both fired. They both missed. No blood, just bruised egos. And then, as if nothing had happened, they went back to work running the British Empire. More people have been to space than have flown the Concorde. Let that sink in. Only about 120 pilots ever flew the world's fastest commercial airliner, the Concorde, before it was retired in 2003. Meanwhile, over 600 astronauts have rocketed beyond Earth's atmosphere. The Concorde could cross the Atlantic in under 3.5 hours at twice the speed of sound, but its elite cockpit crew remained rarer than space travelers. It was a flying icon, exclusive, expensive, and loud enough to trigger sonic booms. And now, just a memory, parked in museums while astronauts keep multiplying. In July 1958, the tallest tsunami ever recorded didn't just roll in, it erased a mountainside. It hit Lituya Bay, a remote fjord in Alaska, with a vertical wall of water that soared to 1,720 feet, taller than the Empire State Building. But this wasn't your typical tsunami triggered by an undersea earthquake. It was caused by a massive landslide. 90 million tons of rock plummeted into the bay after a 7.8 magnitude quake shook the region. The impact displaced so much water, it launched the wave like a liquid missile. Trees were stripped clean up the sides of the surrounding cliffs, boats were flung like toys, and 2 people were swept away and never found. This wasn't a ripple, it was a vertical water bomb, and it left scars that are still visible to this day. Moving statues. The only statue from ancient Rome that's managed to survive nearly 2,000 years outdoors without being torn down, melted, or forgotten is the equestrian statue of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Sculpted in the late 2nd century AD, it stood in public view in Rome for centuries, almost like time itself forgot to mess with it. Ironically, the reason it wasn't destroyed like so many others is because medieval Christians mistakenly thought it depicted Constantine, the first Christian emperor. That accidental identity saved it from the melting pot. After surviving earthquakes, invasions, and pollution, it was finally brought indoors in the 1980s to keep it from decaying. The one outside today, that's just a replica. The real thing now rests safely in the Capitoline museums. Arthur Priest was a stoker on the Titanic. Stokers were among the unlikeliest crewmen to survive a sinking ship, or even a badly damaged one. Seawater would flood their compartments first, drowning them. The rest of the crew would scramble to shut watertight doors to save the ship, trapping their comrades in the compartments below. Somehow, though, in chronological order, Priest survived. A collision on RMS Asturias maiden voyage, 1908, a collision on Titanic's sister ship, RMS Olympic, 1911, the sinking of RMS Titanic, 1912, the First World War sinking of HMS Alcantara, 1916, the First World War sinking of Titanic's other sister ship, HMHS Britannic, 1916, the SS Donegal First World War sinking, 1917. The first time a Roman emperor passed the crown directly to his son while still alive didn't happen until 180 AD, when Commodus took over from his father Marcus Aurelius. They had actually co-ruled for 3 years before that, starting in 177 AD. What's shocking is that this kind of dynastic succession took more than 2 centuries to happen, even though Augustus kicked off the whole imperial system back in 27 BC. Until then, emperors were chosen more often through adoption, backroom politics, or military support than by bloodlines. Rome wasn't a family business until Commodus made it one. While the guillotine is commonly associated with the brutality of the French Revolution, the Nazis also used the guillotine during the 12 years they were in power. In October 1936, Hitler secretly ordered 20 guillotines to be distributed to prisons in cities across Germany. According to Nazi records, they were used to execute approximately 16,500 people between 1933 and 1945, including resistance fighters and political protesters, a similar number to the French Reign of Terror. In 1820, a man named Gregor MacGregor pulled off one of the boldest cons in history. He invented an entire country. He called it PHARAOH, claimed it was in South America, and marketed it as a land flowing with gold, fertile soil, and opportunity. The catch? PHARAOH didn't exist. That didn't stop him from selling land at 4 shillings an acre and even issuing official-looking currency and government bonds. People packed up, sold everything, and sailed out, only to arrive in a jungle with no towns, no farms, and no sign of the promised paradise. It was a fantasy with fatal consequences. Many settlers died, and MacGregor, he just kept selling dreams. Accidental invention. The microwave oven was born by accident, literally melted into existence. In 1945, engineer Percy Spencer was fiddling with a radar set when he noticed something strange. The chocolate bar in his pocket had turned to goo. Instead of panicking, he poked around and realized the high-powered microwaves from the radar were cooking his snack. That wild moment of snack sabotage led to one of the most convenient kitchen inventions ever made. No blueprint, no lab test. Just one confused guy, a radar unit, and a ruined candy bar. Bulgaria stands alone. Bulgaria once found itself fighting an impossible battle. On September 8, 1944, it was officially at war with all 4 major World War II powers in Europe: the USA, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and Germany. That's right. In just one day, Bulgaria managed to tick off everyone on the battlefield, a unique moment of total isolation amid the chaos of the war. This happened during a chaotic shift in alliances and power, making Bulgaria the only country simultaneously fighting against both the Axis and Allied giants. It's like accidentally challenging the entire neighborhood to a fight at once. And somehow, Bulgaria pulled that off. During the first 6 months of World War II, more British people died in road accidents on blacked-out roads than in the armed forces. The blackout rules, meant to protect cities from enemy bombers, plunged streets into near-total darkness, making night driving a deadly gamble. Drivers struggled to see pedestrians, other vehicles, and obstacles, turning roads into accidental battlegrounds far deadlier than the war zones for many civilians. This grim irony highlights just how chaos on the home front could be as lethal as the front line. In 536 AD, a cluster of volcanic eruptions unleashed an enormous cloud of soot and ash into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight across Europe. The result? Temperatures plunged by a staggering 2.5 degrees Celsius in just 1 year. To put that in perspective, that's nearly halfway to the average temperature drop during the last ice age. Imagine the chaos, crops failing, skies darkened, and a chill that disrupted life on an unprecedented scale, all triggered by those fiery mountains blowing their tops. The world's biggest city has shifted dramatically over the centuries. Back in 1 AD, Alexandria in Egypt held the crown with its bustling port and vibrant culture. Fast forward to 500 AD, and Nanjing in China took the lead, thriving as a political and economic hub. By 1000 AD, Cordoba in Spain was the largest, famous for its architectural marvels and as a beacon of knowledge during the Islamic Golden Age. Beijing dominated with its massive population and status as the imperial capital. Finally, in 2000, Tokyo surged ahead as the world's biggest city, a sprawling metropolis and economic powerhouse with over 30 million people in its metro area. The crown of the largest city is not fixed. It moves with the tides of history, empire, and innovation. Hitler's half-nephew's service in the U.S. Navy. William Patrick Hitler, born in England in 1911 and the son of Adolf Hitler's half-brother Alois, moved to Germany in the 1930s. He became a source of concern for Adolf Hitler, and in 1939, he published an article titled, "Why I Hate My Uncle." in Look magazine before immigrating to the United States later that year. In 1944, he appealed to President Roosevelt to join the fight against his uncle, which the FBI believed to be genuine, and served in the U.S. Navy until 1947. He later changed his name to William Stewart Houston and passed away in 1987. The oldest toilets go way back to around 3000 BC in the Neolithic village of Skara Brae, Scotland. These weren't just crude holes in the ground. They had actual drainage systems built right into each connected home, making them some of the first examples of indoor plumbing. Fast forward to 1700 BC, and the Palace of Knossos in Crete featured the Queen's toilet with large earthenware pans hooked up to a flushing system, showing just how advanced sanitation had become in ancient times. It's wild to think about how the basics of modern plumbing were already being figured out thousands of years ago. Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Joseph Stalin were all nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Hitler and Mussolini got their nominations in 1939, just as World War II was ramping up, while Stalin was nominated twice, in 1945 and 1948. Right after the war ended, Hitler's nomination came from a Swedish parliament member, Mussolini's from an Italian professor, and Stalin's from a British MP, along with some Norwegian politicians. These nominations are jaw-dropping examples of how political agendas can twist even the most respected awards into something unrecognizable. Nobel Peace Prize nominations don't guarantee peace or virtue. They sometimes reflect the chaotic, complicated politics of their time. Prohibition didn't actually make drinking alcohol illegal. The 18th Amendment in the Volstead Act banned producing, selling, and transporting intoxicating liquors, but owning and drinking alcohol in your own home was never against the law. People could still enjoy their hidden stashes in private, which explains why speakeasies and secret parties thrived. The government couldn't police what you already had, so drinking quietly behind closed doors was common during Prohibition. The British government gave up the search for soldiers' body on the Western Front back in September 1921, even though they were still discovering around 500 bodies every single week. Imagine that. Half a decade after the war ended, thousands of soldiers remain lost in the mud and trenches, never recovered or properly buried. The scale of devastation was so massive, it simply became impossible to find everyone. This brutal reality still haunts history, reminding us how war leaves scars that outlive the battlefield. Britain's last witch was actually a Scottish medium named Helen Duncan, but don't get the wrong idea. She wasn't burned at the stake in the 1600s. Instead, she was jailed in 1943 under the Witchcraft Act of 1735, accused of faking spiritual communication during World War II. That law was supposed to target fraud, but Helen's arrest was tangled up with wartime paranoia. So technically, she was the last person imprisoned for witchcraft in Britain, almost 200 years after the witch hunts faded. Los Angeles owes its massive sprawl not to cars, but to trains. 100 years ago, it had the largest electric railway system in the world, known as the Red Car. This network connected neighborhoods and suburbs, allowing the city to spread out far beyond what cars alone could handle. So ironically, the car culture LA is famous for actually grew out of a city designed around trains. In medieval royal courts, jesters were the ultimate entertainers, but Henry II took it to a whole new level with his fool, Roland. Roland wasn't just cracking jokes, his specialty was flatulence. Every Christmas he performed a show called One Jump and Whistle and One Fart, and Henry was so amused he rewarded him with a manor in Suffolk, complete with 30 acres of land. Imagine getting real estate for a well-timed toot. Now that's the power of comedic gas. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy and one of the highest-ranking Nazis, showed up uninvited in Scotland in May 1941, hoping to broker peace with Britain. The plot failed spectacularly, and as a result, he was locked up briefly in the Tower of London, the same fortress that had held centuries of prisoners. Remarkably, Hess ended up being the very last state prisoner ever confined there, closing a brutal chapter in the Tower's dark history. In 1954, the French town of Châteauneuf-du-Pape took a bold step by making it illegal for flying saucers to land there. Alien spaceships were officially banned. Why? Probably a mix of protecting the vineyards and a hefty dose of UFO paranoia during the early days of the space age. Imagine a town council meeting debating alien landings like they were a traffic violation. It's one of those weird but real laws showing how seriously some places took extraterrestrial visits back then. In 1913, Vienna wasn't just home to art, music, and Freud. It also hosted a bizarre historical coincidence. For a few months, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Leon Trotsky, and Josip Broz Tito all lived in the same city at the same time. That's a house of horrors waiting to happen. They didn't know each other then, but each would go on to shape the 20th century in a terrifying ways. Hitler was a starving artist. Stalin was hiding under aliases. Trotsky was scribbling revolutionary manifestos in cafes, and Tito was working at a car factory. One wrong coffeehouse conversation in history could have taken a radically different path. The very first British officer to die in World War I had a resume straight out of a colonial history book. He was English by blood, born under the blazing sun of British India, served in a Scottish regiment, and was commanding Senegalese troops in German-controlled Togoland, West Africa. That's 4 continents in one death. His name? Lieutenant George Masterman Thompson. He was leading a charge against a German wireless station when he was shot. It's the kind of global entanglement that made World War I a world war long before the trenches of Europe ever saw blood. The fastest vaccine in human history. For decades, the mumps vaccine held the speed record. It took scientists 4 years to develop, test, and license it back in 1967. That was considered lightning fast for medicine. But then came COVID-19 and science hit the accelerator. In under 11 months, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine went from lab to global rollout, smashing the old record. This wasn't luck. It was the result of decades of mRNA research, global funding, and a once-in-a-generation collaboration between scientists, companies, and governments. It proved one thing: when the world unites under pressure, we can bend time. The Vanishing King, Richard the Lionheart, ruled from abroad. Richard the Lionheart was crowned King of England, but you'd be lucky to spot him on home soil. Out of his 10-year reign, he only spent about 6 months in England. The rest? He was off fighting in the Crusades, getting captured, or managing his empire from afar. For a king so iconic in English folklore, he barely bothered to learn the language. He preferred speaking French. England funded his wars, but he treated it more like an ATM than a kingdom. Ruler in name, absentee in practice. Day of Fate. Germany's haunted calendar. November 9th is no ordinary date in German history. It's called Schicksalstag, the Day of Fate, and for a good reason. The German revolutions of 1848 to 1849 were part of a broader wave of uprisings across Europe, driven by demands for liberal reforms, national unity, and greater political freedom. In 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate, ending centuries of monarchy. Just 5 years later, in 1923, a young Adolf Hitler tried and failed to overthrow the government in the infamous Beer Hall Putsch. Fast forward to 1938, and the night of Kristallnacht unfolded, when Nazi mobs attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues in a state-sponsored rampage. Then, in 1989, came a moment of redemption. The Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the end of the Cold War. 5 seismic events, 1 cursed day. Coincidence or fate? In July 1945, the USS Indianapolis was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sank in just 12 minutes. Of the nearly 1,200 crew, about 900 made it into the water alive. But for the next 4 days, those men were stranded in shark-infested waters with no food, no water, and no rescue in sight. Hypothermia, saltwater poisoning, and dehydration claimed hundreds. But what made this tragedy infamous? The sharks. Oceanic white tips swarmed the scene. By the time help finally arrived, only 316 men had survived. It's considered the worst shark attack disaster in recorded history, not in one bite, but in a slow, terrifying massacre. Napoleon didn't just march into Russia with cannons and ego. He brought 187,600 horses with him. Cavalry, wagons, officers, artillery, all powered by muscle. But when winter bit down in 1812, only 1,600 horses made it out alive. That's a 99% loss rate. Blizzards, starvation, exhaustion, and brutal ambushes turned his grand invasion into a freezing graveyard. The real tragedy? He lost more horsepower than some modern armies even own today. Russia didn't just defeat Napoleon's men. It buried his cavalry in snow and silence. During World War I, France's black colonial troops were treated as expendable. Their death rate wasn't just high, it was 3 times higher than their white counterparts. Why? Because they were constantly assigned the most dangerous, near-suicidal missions. Storming trenches, charging machine guns, and digging under enemy fire. These men, often from West Africa, were thrown into the worst of the fighting, not because they were more capable, but because military leaders saw them as less valuable. London's most boring crimes still exist. In 1839, the Metropolitan Police Act rolled in with a mission: clean up the streets of London, and by clean up, they meant outlawing fun. Knocking on doors and legging it? Illegal. Flying a kite? Illegal. Singing a dirty song in public? Big no-no. Even sliding on icy pavements was considered an offense. Nearly 2 centuries later, these laws are still technically on the books. Yup, in modern London, you could be fined up to £500 for channeling your inner Mary Poppins or prankster kid. It's the price of living in a city where Victorian rules never truly die. Before going into battle, Japanese samurai didn't just suit up, they went full-on face paint mode. But it wasn't just for intimidation. They painted their faces, their horses, and even their teeth. Plus, they left a hole in their helmets, yep, an actual hole, believing it was a sole escape hatch in case things went south. So while they looked fierce, they also made sure their spirits could bail if needed. While Egypt's Great Pyramids rose to the sky, perfectly aligned and towering over the desert, somewhere way up in the Arctic, a tiny population of woolly mammoths was still clinging to survival on Wrangel Island. That means while humans were mastering stone and architecture down south, these ancient giants were holding out in icy isolation, long after mammoths disappeared from most of the planet. It's a stunning overlap of worlds, ancient engineering and prehistoric life coexisting in time, just thousands of miles apart. Genghis Khan wasn't just a ruthless conqueror, he was a prolific progenitor too. Estimates put the number of his children somewhere between several hundred and over 1,000. Scientists back this up by analyzing DNA across populations, revealing that roughly 1 in every 200 people alive today, about 16 million, carry his genetic legacy. That's a staggering example of how one man's influence can echo through centuries, not just in history books, but literally in our genes. During World War I, President Woodrow Wilson and his wife Edith turned the White House lawn into an unexpected pasture by keeping sheep right on the grounds. Why? To naturally trim the grass and cut down on landscaping expenses. But here's the twist. The sheep's wool wasn't just left to waste. It was auctioned off to raise funds for the Red Cross, blending practicality with patriotism in a surprisingly smart way. In 1962, a laughter epidemic erupted at a girls' school in Tanganyika, now Tanzania, and it wasn't your average giggle fit. It spread uncontrollably, jumping to nearby schools and villages, infecting thousands with nonstop laughter. This wasn't just a case of the hiccups, it lasted for months, disrupting daily life so badly that schools had to shut down entirely. Scientists still debate whether it was a psychological contagion triggered by stress, but one thing's clear. Laughter in this case wasn't just the best medicine, it was a full-blown crisis. The final defender of Rorke's Drift, Frank Bourne, didn't just survive a brutal battle. He outlived almost everyone else and passed away at the age of 91. Here's the kicker. He died on May 8, 1945, the exact day Europe celebrated Victory in Europe Day, marking the end of World War II. Talk about timing. His life bridged two monumental moments in military history. In 1800, George III faced two assassination attempts in just one day and somehow lived to tell the tale. The first strike happened in Hyde Park during the morning when someone fired a shot at him. The bullet missed the king but hit a nearby civil servant who luckily survived. Not done yet, the evening brought round two at the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane, where a mentally unstable Army veteran tried again and missed again. George III didn't flinch. He ordered the show to go on like nothing happened. Talk about royal resilience and nerves of steel. Back in the 17th century, the king of Arakan had a wildly unconventional way to pick his wives. He'd make all the candidates stand out, baking in the sun, sweat dripping. Then he'd do a blind sniff test of their sweaty clothes. If the smell didn't pass his royal nose, those women were passed down to lesser nobles. Talk about a brutal and oddly personal vetting process. In 1510, rats who destroyed a field of barley were summoned to face trial. Their defense lawyer, Bartholomew Chassany, argued that attending court would put his clients at risk from local cats and dogs. A reasonable fear of death was a sufficient reason to excuse a human from court. If rats were to be subject to the same laws, surely the same mitigation had to apply. The judge postponed the trial indefinitely. In 2017, a 1,000-year-old Chinese Buddha statue got an unexpected hospital visit in the Netherlands for a CT scan. What the doctors found inside wasn't just empty space or treasure. It was a perfectly preserved, mummified monk. Even more astonishing, the monk's internal organs were completely gone, suggesting he had self-mummified before being sealed into the statue. This isn't just ancient art, it's a literal body frozen in time, showing a dedication to spiritual practice that defies modern understanding. The process of self-mummification is brutal and rare, involving years of extreme dieting and meditation to preserve the body naturally after death. In 1939, the entire U.S. Army was just 190,000 strong, roughly the size of a big city's population. Fast forward 6 years to 1945, and that number exploded to 8.5 million. That's like growing from a small-town football stadium crowd to filling almost every Major League Baseball stadium in the country, multiplied several times over. The scale of mobilization during World War II was staggering, showing just how quickly a nation can shift gears when pushed to the brink. Queen Elizabeth's smile in her later years wasn't exactly royal gold. It was blackened from consuming too much sugar. Back then, sugar was a luxury treat, but also a dental nightmare, causing severe tooth decay without any modern dental care to save her. Imagine the Queen's regal portraits hiding a sugary secret behind that crown. The world's first skyscraper wasn't born in New York or Chicago in the late 1800s, as most think. It actually appeared way earlier, in 1796 to 1797, tucked away in Shropshire, England. The Shrewsbury Flax Mill Maltings may not look like your typical skyscraper, but its main mill was the very first building to use an iron frame to support its weight, a breakthrough design that became the blueprint for every skyscraper since. This iron skeleton approach is exactly what allows buildings to soar skyward instead of collapsing under their own weight. So technically, this humble mill is the grandparent of every towering skyscraper on the planet today. Long before telescopes and space probes, Babylonian astronomers were already tracking 5 of our solar system's 8 planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, way back in the 2nd millennium BC. That's over 4,000 years ago. They had no fancy gear, just naked eyes and sharp minds. Fast forward to ancient Greece, Aristarchus of Samos, living around 310 to 230 BC, nailed the idea that Earth isn't the center of the universe. He proposed the heliocentric model, putting the Sun, not Earth, at the center of the planetary dance. This was revolutionary. Think of it as the original cosmic mic drop that paved the way for modern astronomy. King Henry VIII didn't just stop at royal bling for himself. He went full medieval pet parent and had a full suit of armor custom-made for his dog. Yeah, you heard that right. Imagine a tiny canine strutting around in metal plates, ready to joust or maybe just guard the castle courtyard. This wasn't some novelty either. It was a serious set of armor, showing just how far Henry would go to protect his furry companion and flaunt his status. What is a quarantine? The word quarantine comes from the 14th century Venetian word quarantina, meaning 40 days. Back then, during the Black Death, Venice didn't mess around. They forced ships and travelers to isolate for a full 40 days before docking or mingling with locals, hoping that's how long it took to stop deadly plague germs from spreading. This harsh wait became the original blueprint for modern quarantine, keeping potentially infected people separated to save entire cities from collapse. Lieutenant Hiro Onoda took Never Surrender to a whole new level. Serving in the Philippines during World War II, he was explicitly ordered to hold out at all costs. So, hold out he did, for nearly 30 years after the war ended. That's right, he kept fighting and hiding until 1974, convinced the war was still on. His old commander had to personally travel there to officially relieve him of duty. When Onoda finally came home, he wasn't just a soldier, he was a living legend. His stubborn loyalty became a symbol of extreme dedication, even if it defied reality. Back in 1759, during the Siege of Madras, the French threw a fit because the British defenders supposedly fired at their headquarters. The British didn't waste time. They promptly apologized. Picture this. In the middle of war, they had to pause just to say, "Sorry about that." That's some uncharacteristically polite crossfire for 18th century warfare. In rural Scotland and Northern Ireland during the 18th and 19th centuries, a bizarre wedding tradition called blackening the bride was all the rage. Right before the ceremony, the bride, and sometimes the groom, would be doused in a nasty mix of soot, mud, and feathers by their friends and family. Think of it as a chaotic pre-wedding makeover. The idea? To scare off evil spirits and sprinkle a bit of luck on the couple's new life. It was less about hygiene and more about superstition. All correct. The phrase "okay" actually started as a cheeky joke in 1830s Boston when people began deliberately misspelling words for fun. Instead of writing "all correct," they wrote "all correct," kind of a playful way to show everything was fine. Newspapers caught on to this trend and helped spread it far and wide. Then in 1840, Martin Van Buren, a U.S. president from Kinderhook, New York, jumped on the bandwagon. His re-election campaign cleverly used "OK" as shorthand for Old Kinderhook, which became the nickname for his supporters. They even formed "OK" clubs all over the country, turning a slang joke into an official slogan. What started as a local Boston fad turned into one of the most universally recognized terms on the planet. From a pun to political branding, "OK" made the leap from playful misspelling to the global symbol of agreement, acceptance, and all good. It's fascinating how something so simple and quirky embedded itself in everyday language worldwide. Britain has invaded or fought conflicts in the territory of 171 out of the 193 United Nations member states. That's nearly 90% of the entire world's countries. This staggering reach isn't just about historical empires. It highlights how deeply Britain's military and colonial ambitions shaped global history. From small islands to vast continents, few places on Earth escaped British involvement through war or invasion. This fact underscores just how intertwined modern geopolitics and history are with Britain's past actions. The Halifax gibbet was essentially the world's earliest guillotine. Invented in Yorkshire nearly 200 years before the French Revolution, made the guillotine infamous. Picture a giant axe mounted on a wooden frame, designed to swiftly behead criminals. Halifax used it as a brutal, public deterrent, even for minor crimes like petty theft. It stayed in use until the mid-1600s. This grim contraption didn't just vanish, it inspired the Maiden, a similar execution device first employed in Scotland during Mary Queen of Scots' reign. Essentially, Halifax set the stage for history's most notorious execution machines. In just 50 days during July and August 1943 on the Eastern Front of World War II, the combined losses of German and Soviet forces were staggering, so massive that they exceeded the total casualties suffered by both the USA and Great Britain combined throughout the entire war. This brutal clash, centered around the Battle of Kursk, was the deadliest and most intense chunk of fighting in the whole conflict, reflecting how the Eastern Front was truly the war's bloodiest theater. In England, around 1800, nearly 40% of brides showed up at the altar already pregnant. This wasn't some scandalous secret. Pregnancy before marriage was pretty common back then, and society was surprisingly tolerant of it. It reflects a very different set of social norms, where marriage was often rushed or arranged once a pregnancy was confirmed, rather than the other way around. Imagine nearly half the weddings starting with a little surprise guest already on the way. This tells us a lot about how people handled relationships and social pressures centuries ago. It wasn't about hiding, it was about making sure the family stayed intact and the baby had legitimacy. The legal and social importance of marriage then meant a pregnancy could hasten a wedding rather than delay it. Mark Twain kind of predicted his own death. In 1909, he said, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now there are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together. They must go out together." He died of a heart attack on 21st April 1910, one day after the comet had come again and appeared at its brightest. Halley's Comet only passes by Earth approximately every 76 years and has been the subject of a string of predictions since 1705. Dartmoor in South Devon isn't just scenic, it's a Bronze Age gold mine. This 400 square mile national park packs the highest concentration of Bronze Age remains in Britain. Imagine 18 stone circles and 75 stone rows scattered across the moor, each one a silent monument to ancient lives. It's basically a prehistoric open-air museum showing just how important this landscape was thousands of years ago. While the world watched the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, they didn't know just how close they came to destruction. The U.S. Navy dropped harmless depth charges on a submerged Russian submarine off the coast of Cuba to try and force it to surface. The crew, believing that World War III had begun, argued whether they should launch the nuclear torpedo that they had on board and came close to a unanimous vote to launch. Luckily, senior officer Vasily Arkhipov cast the one vote needed to stop the impending destruction. The 1718 Puckle gun wasn't just any old firearm, it was basically a propaganda machine on wheels. This early machine gun was designed to shoot round bullets at Christians and square bullets at heathens. Why the shape difference? The inventor believed the square bullets would be more terrifying, meant to teach the benefits of Christian civilization. In reality, it was a bizarre mix of racism, religion, and early military tech, all rolled into one awkward piece of history. During World War II, the humble baguette wasn't just a tasty staple, it became a secret weapon. French bakers turned into covert operatives, slipping messages and even supplies inside those crusty loaves to aid the resistance fighters battling the German occupation. Imagine picking up your daily bread and finding it packed with underground secrets. Talk about your carbs with a cause. This wasn't just baking, it was rebellion disguised as breakfast. In 1987, American Airlines pulled off a genius cost-saving move by removing just one olive from every first-class salad. It sounds tiny, but it added up to a whopping $40,000 saved. That's a perfect example of how small changes can make a massive difference when scaled across thousands of meals. Every little olive really did count. Japanese engineer Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived both atomic bombings in World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 6, 1945, he was on a business trip in Hiroshima, just about 1.9 miles, 3 kilometers, from the blast epicenter. Despite severe burns and temporary blindness, he lived. The next day, he traveled back to his hometown of Nagasaki. On August 9th, Yamaguchi was roughly 1.1 miles, 1.8 kilometers, from the center of the second atomic bomb explosion. He survived again, though injured along with his wife and infant daughter. Surviving 2 atomic blasts at such close range is a grim record few could match. Edward II's death is a grim historical mystery wrapped in rumors. Officially, he died in captivity in September 1327, but the juicy and highly unreliable legend claims he was murdered in a particularly brutal way, by having a red-hot poker inserted into his rectum. Historians treat this story with skepticism, seeing it as political propaganda or sensationalism of the era. Still, it's one of those dark tales that perfectly captures medieval intrigue and the brutal reality of royal power struggles. In 1997, an excavation near the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes revealed the oldest prosthesis ever discovered, an engraved wooden toe, fitted to the right foot of an Egyptian noblewoman who lived 3,000 years ago. The Cairo toe was practical, modified over time to accommodate the woman's gait, but it was also designed with aesthetics in mind, intended to be worn in open-toe sandals, not concealed. Having adopted the identity of John Palmer and posing as a horse trader in Yorkshire, highwayman Dick Turpin instigated his own demise by murdering hunting associate John Robinson's gamecock on 2 October 1738. When Robinson angrily responded, Turpin threatened to also kill him, which brought the incident to the attention of 3 local justices. Charles Dickens had a fear of trains. In 1865, the novelist Charles Dickens was involved in his own dramatic turn of events. He was traveling on a train that suddenly plunged off a bridge. He escaped unharmed and was even able to help the other passengers before rescuers arrived. And he went back into his mangled carriage to grab his unfinished manuscript for our mutual friend. Even though he wasn't permanently injured, the crash would have a major impact as, terrified at the prospect, he avoided traveling by train for the rest of his life. He also failed to turn up at the inquest investigating the crash, as he'd been traveling with his mistress at the time and was keen to keep that quiet. In early modern Europe and colonial America, a special brew called groaning ale was made whenever a woman got pregnant. This wasn't just any ale. It was crafted at the start of pregnancy and carefully aged throughout the entire term. When labor kicked in, the mother and the midwife would drink from this strong 8% alcohol ale, supposedly to prepare for the birth. But it didn't stop there. After the baby was born, the leftover ale, now sterile, was poured over the newborn. This ritual was believed to protect the infant and bless the delivery, mixing tradition, superstition, and early medicine in a single potent brew. Abraham Lincoln wasn't just the 16th president of the United States. He was also a legit wrestling champ. Before the presidency, he reportedly wrestled in about 300 matches and lost only once. That's right, Honest Abe was throwing down long before he was throwing out laws. His strength and agility helped build the kind of grit that carried him through the toughest political battles of his time. Wrestling wasn't just a hobby, it was part of what made Lincoln a formidable figure, both physically and mentally. Henry, I didn't mess around with family justice. He ordered two of his granddaughters to be blinded and have the tips of their noses sliced off because their father had blinded another noble son. Talk about brutal consequences. Their mother, Julianne, was so furious she tried to assassinate Henry with a crossbow. She missed, then dramatically jumped off her castle tower into the moat and escaped like something out of a medieval thriller. This wasn't just petty family drama. It was bloody and ruthless power politics. Pluto, that tiny dwarf planet out past Neptune, got its name thanks to an 11-year-old schoolgirl. She entered a naming contest and nailed it, beating out adults and astronomers. Imagine having a whole planet named after your suggestion before even hitting middle school. Talk about cosmic luck. The name stuck because it fit the cold, dark world far from the sun, and yes, the Disney dog had nothing to do with it. This kid's Pluto will be remembered forever in the solar system. Stalin's eldest son died in a German concentration camp. Stalin's eldest son, Yakov Jugashvili, had a brutal and tragic life overshadowed by his father's iron grip. Raised mostly by an aunt, he didn't even meet Stalin until he was 14. When World War II erupted, Yakov served as a Russian soldier and was eventually captured by the Nazis. Once they discovered who he was, the Nazis tried to use him as a bargaining chip, hoping Stalin would trade prisoners. Stalin's response was cold and ruthless. "You have not only my son Yakov, but millions of my sons. Free them all, or my son will share their fate." Yakov died in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, reportedly while trying to climb the electric fence, an attempt at escape that ended in death. Stalin's refusal to negotiate showed the brutal logic of totalitarian power, valuing millions over one life, even his own sons. In 200 BC, Emperor Gaozu of Han commissioned the Weiyang Palace complex just north of what is now Xi'an. It holds the record as the largest palace ever built on Earth, sprawling over 4.8 square kilometers, 1,200 acres. To put that into perspective, it was nearly 7 times larger than Beijing's Forbidden City and 11 times the size of Vatican City. Despite its massive scale and historical significance, almost nothing remains of it today. Time and turmoil have erased this colossal architectural marvel from the landscape. In 1932, the government of Western Australia declared war on emus, a native bird species that was damaging crops in the region. The government sent soldiers armed with machine guns to hunt the emus, who proved elusive. Despite firing thousands of rounds of ammunition, the soldiers were able to kill only a few emus, before the government declared peace after less than a week. On 28 January 1896, Walter Arnold drove his horseless carriage through Paddock Wood, Kent, at a reckless 8 miles per hour, 4 times the 2 miles per hour speed limit. He also had no man with a red flag preceding him, as required by law. Arnold was chased down by a police officer on a bicycle and later fined £4 7 shillings, of which 10 shillings was for speeding, the world's first recorded speeding ticket. In 1644, the Puritan Parliament declared every last Wednesday of the month would be a legally mandated fast day. Christmas Day fell on the last Wednesday of the month, so no feasting was to be allowed that year. Time should be spent in even more solemn humiliation, repenting of your sins for making Christmas a time of carnal and sensual delights in the past. In 1647, they went the whole hog, banning all celebrations of Christmas and Easter for good. Charles II reversed this when he came to the throne in 1660. In 1859, a shy German mathematician named Bernhard Riemann wrote a paper just 9 pages long. Inside, almost as a footnote, he dropped a brain-bending riddle about prime numbers, which we now call the Riemann hypothesis. Then, he died young, at 39 years old. No proof, no follow-up, just one of the deepest unsolved mysteries in math history. Today, it's worth $1 million prize, has driven thousands of brilliant minds mad, and still guards the secrets of prime numbers like a ghost hiding in the decimal shadows. All from a guy who only published 1 paper on the topic. That's a wrap on 100 mind-blowing history facts that prove the past is anything but boring. If you thought you knew history, think again. Hit subscribe for more truth bombs that schools forgot to tell you, and drop a comment on which fact blew your mind the most. I am grateful for your thoughts and corrections. It will make the list more robust and remarkable. If you have a correction or suggestion, please let us know.
At SciFacts Info, your go-to channel for fascinating and educational facts. From interesting trivia to mind-blowing discoveries, we deliver bite-sized content designed to entertain and inform curious minds.